A storm-swept night. The scent of old paper and bitter whiskey hangs heavy as Emily Foster stands beneath the harsh chandelier light. Her father's accusation rips through the air. You're not even her real granddaughter. Can betrayal really be measured by blood? Beneath Grandmother Rose Collins' stern photograph, every tick of the grandfather clock vibrates with buried secrets. Is inheritance determined by lineage or love? Emily's trembling fingers glance over a faded photograph, rage and disbelief battling fiercely in her chest. What if one revelation could erase everything you've ever called home? Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune. Her father's voice drips with disdain. She feels trapped in Grandmother Rose's library, heavy walnut bookshelves filled with leather-bound classics looming overhead, silent witnesses to his cruelty. Only 3 days since their loss, and already the family is fracturing over the will. "What are you talking about?" she manages, her voice barely a whisper, drowned out by the furious thudding of her heart. "Don't play innocent, Emily. Your mom's little secret isn't a secret anymore." He paces the Persian carpet, glaring at the photograph of Rose above the mantel. "Once the trust advisor confirms you've got no foster blood, you'll get nothing." Steeling herself, Emily meets his gaze. "Do you promise to keep your word? That only blood relatives deserve grandmother's inheritance?" "Absolutely," he asserts, chin raised, mirroring the confidence drilled into him over years of entitlement. "I'll ensure the family legacy stays with real Blackwells, not imposters." In that moment, everything shifts. "My name is Emily Foster. I'm 27 years old, and until 5 minutes ago I believed Douglas Foster was my biological father. Now, standing in this Georgian mansion in suburban Philadelphia, I'm learning otherwise. All I wanted was simple: the fair treatment Grandmother Rose had promised in her will. She had specifically mentioned me, her only granddaughter, during our last conversation about her estate plans. But here I stood, facing the man who had always regarded me with thinly veiled disdain, the man whose approval I had desperately sought for decades, yet never found. "You can attend the will reading next week if you must," he continues dismissively, "but don't expect anything. I've already spoken with Harrison about challenging any provisions that include you." The storm outside rages, mirroring the tempest within. Could the truth reveal a legacy built on love, or would it tear down the last remnants of family? Heavy afternoon light poured through the library windows, casting a golden glow on the desk where Emily Foster's hands trembled against the cool walnut. The air was thick with the scent of her grandmother Rose's lavender and old paper, flooding her with nostalgia and making the tension in her chest unbearable. Outside, raised voices erupted, accusations slicing through the air like lightning before a storm. The phone buzzed urgently in her pocket, her mother's message demanding answers that sent chills down her spine. What truth lies in the shadows, she thought, realizing if the man she had called Dad wasn't who she believed, then what devastating secrets lurked, waiting to strike. Emily's heart raced as her father, Douglas, paced the Persian carpet, fury radiating off him. "Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune," he spat, his disdain palpable. The words felt like a betrayal, transforming the air between them to ice. "What do you mean?" she stammered, her voice barely escaping her lips. "Don't pretend you don't know," he sneered. "As soon as the trust advisor confirms your mom's secret, you'll see you're not a foster. You'll get nothing." The weight of the revelation crashed down on her. Just days ago, Grandmother Rose had promised her a fair share in the will. Now, Emily found herself tangled in a web of deceit. A single thought echoed through her mind. Who am I, if not a foster? She tried to muster resolve, meeting his gaze. Do you really believe only blood counts? What about the bonds we share? Douglas's scoff cut through her words. The law cares about facts, not feelings. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as he dismissed her with an air of finality. I'll see you at the will reading, but you won't like what happens." Emily sat down heavily in the chair, her breath catching. Her phone buzzed again. "We need to talk about your father tonight, alone." The weight of her mother's message pulled at her as unease crept like fog through her mind. If Douglas wasn't her real father, then who was he? And why now, just days after grandmother's death? The truth seemed inevitable, but would it reveal a family built on love, or shatter the last remnants of connection? Emily's memories of growing up in the Foster household were tangled with privilege and expectation. Douglas, her father, was supposed to be the guiding force, yet his disdain always loomed like a dark cloud. The family wealth, the legacy of pharmaceutical triumphs, now felt like a yoke around her neck. Uncle James, her father's younger brother, was the family rebel, a man who had dared to dream beyond their rigid legacy. She found herself yearning for the warmth of his laughter, longing for the free-spirited connection she once felt. As thunder rumbled outside, she grasped for clarity among the chaos. What else was buried in the family's past? Would she discover a truth that could either bind them or tear their legacy apart? The stakes were higher than ever, and the secrets of the Blackwells were far from over. Porcelain teacups rattled against their saucers as Grandmother Rose Collins' voice faded. Her gaze shifted toward the shadows gathering in the library, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Outside, a low thunder rolled across the hills, mirroring the whirlwind of questions racing through Emily Foster's mind. Had she ever really belonged here? The air was thick with dust and secrets, like the whispers of the family that had raised her. Emily leaned in, heart racing, ready to pry deeper into the family's past. But just as she gathered the courage to speak, Rose's trembling hand captured her attention. "There's something you need to know about Douglas." A wave of panic surged through Emily. Douglas Foster, the man who'd always measured worth by achievements and status, had always held a power over her. Her brothers, Thomas and William, they were golden children in his eyes. But Emily, she had been a perpetual disappointment, too soft, too unfocused, never quite living up to the family name. A bitter ache echoed within her. What if the distance she felt from her father had deeper roots? Grandmother Rose had been her haven, the only one who appreciated Emily's passion for historical preservation. Meetings over tea at the estate felt like a lifeline, where Rose would recount tales of old, her own quiet rebellions echoing in Emily's heart. "Emily Foster," she'd softly say. "A Foster makes their own path." Yet here she was, mourning the loss of her advocate, navigating a chasm of family expectations that felt unbridgeable. Days slipped by post-funeral, and Emily sensed something shifting in her father's demeanor. A sharpened gaze, whispered conversations with their trusted advisor that halted upon her entry. What were they hiding? Could her grandmother's final words hold a hidden meaning, pushing Emily to question everything? Her instincts whispered a truth yet unspoken. Thunder cracked like an ancient spell, and the weight of family secrets pressed down on her. What awaited her in the dark corners of the Foster legacy? One thing was clear. Understanding her place in this family might cost her more than she ever bargained for. Would she uncover a truth that united them, or one that shattered the fragile threads of connection? The stakes felt monumental, the mysteries looming larger than life. With one last shared glance with Grandmother Rose's photograph upon the walnut bookshelves, Emily took a deep breath, summoning the courage she so desperately needed. What was lying beneath the surface of this old family legacy? Secrets and revelations loomed ahead. Would she find clarity or be swallowed by the shadows? The next chapter was just beginning. Rain drummed against the old porch, wrapping around Emily like a familiar blanket. Memories of her grandmother Rose Collins washed over her, the warmth of those cinnamon tea afternoons, the soft, faded quilts, and that reassuring embrace. But beneath the surface, a storm brewed, distant thunder heralding the secrets left unspoken. Rose's hand had lingered on Emily's shoulder that day, her voice quivering as she wove tales of trust and legacy. Yet the sweetness of those moments clashed with the heavy ache in Emily's chest. Love within her family always came tied to mystery. As she stepped into the dimly lit cafe, Emily felt anticipation and dread pool in her stomach. What storm was brewing in her family that her grandmother had tried to prepare her for? Her mother sat at their usual spot, an island of calm in the bustling room, but today she looked smaller, her posture slightly slumped, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "I never wanted you to find out this way," she began, fingers twisting nervously around her wedding band. "Your father, Douglas, shouldn't have told you like that. It was cruel and selfish." Emily's heart pounded. "So it's true? He's not my biological father?" Her mother nodded, tears brimming. "It's complicated, Emily. More complicated than Douglas makes it sound." The cafe faded away as her mother shared a tale of love and loss, unraveling the fabric of Emily's identity. Before Douglas, her mother had been with James, her uncle, young, passionate, and dreaming of the future. Then came the fellowship in Seattle. "We thought we could manage the distance," she said, voice trembling. But separation strained their bond. In a moment of vulnerability, she turned to Douglas, who had long admired her from afar. A brief relationship ensued, but it ended when she realized her heart belonged to James. Then came the moment that changed everything. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I was certain it was James's child." The weight of her mother's confession pressed down on Emily. But Douglas insisted the child was his. The revelation hung between them, each word echoing in the silence. In that instant, Emily felt as if the very ground beneath her shifted. Could everything she thought she knew about her identity be built on a foundation of half-truths? The pieces slipped together and fell apart, leaving her reeling. What did this mean for her place within the Foster legacy? Her grandmother had been her rock, and now even that was shrouded in uncertainty. What secrets lay hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? Would the truth unite her with her family, or tear the fragile threads of connection apart? The stakes had never felt so high, and every new crumb they unearthed led Emily Foster deeper into the thicket of family ties and long-buried secrets. Would she find herself within the shadows, or would the truth emerge, illuminating the dark corners of the Foster legacy? No turning back now. The next chapter of her life awaited, filled with uncertainty and the quest for clarity. Emily Foster felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Douglas had proposed, making marriage sound almost noble, but her mother's reply lingered like a shadow. "His intentions were never pure," she said, bitter tones lacing her voice. "The Foster fortune was sewn into strict conditions. Only male heirs with legitimate children inherit. He needed me." She paused, emotions swirling. "But I needed stability for my baby. At that time, it felt like my only option." Years unfurled, shrouded in secrets. James, her uncle, departed for Philadelphia, his life headed toward science and away from family ties. Did he ever know the truth? Emily held her breath. "No," her mother whispered. "I couldn't bear to disrupt his life." Again. The confirmation struck Emily like lightning. Every cherished childhood memory began to unravel. Her father's coldness, juxtaposed with Uncle James's fleeting warmth during his visits, and Grandmother Rose Collins' extra attention. Why was this secret surfacing now? She couldn't hold back. "What changed?" Her mother's expression hardened. "It's about your grandmother's will. Douglas has always craved control of the Foster fortune. Now he's terrified that Rose might have left you a portion, so he's trying to undermine your claim." But a truth flashed through Emily's mind. "If I'm not a true Foster," her mother interrupted, "you are a Foster by blood, just not Douglas's child. You're James's daughter, which makes you Rose's granddaughter as well." The irony hung heavy in the air. Douglas's attempts to cut her out from her rightful inheritance had inadvertently woven a stronger claim through another branch of her family tree. "What should I do now?" Emily asked, her voice quivering in this new reality, poised on the edge of uncertainty. Her mother reached across the cafe table, her hands encircling Emily's. "That depends." She took a breath, eyes locking onto Emily's. "What do you truly want? Justice? Recognition? Or simply your fair share of what Rose intended for you?" The air felt electric with possibility as Emily's heart raced with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The next steps loomed in the shadows, unraveling a path that could either heal or destroy. Would uncovering the truth illuminate her legacy or lead her further into the tangled web of inherited pain? The battle for her place in the Foster family was just beginning, and she was ready to fight. I didn't have an answer yet. The betrayal was too fresh, the implications too vast to process in a single conversation. But as we left the cafe, one certainty crystallized in my mind. I would not allow Douglas Foster to rewrite my history for his financial gain. The question was how to prove my true parentage before the will reading, and whether that truth would help or harm my position in the complex web of Foster inheritance rules. The next morning, I drove to Uncle James's apartment, heart hammering against my ribs. I had called ahead, keeping my reason vague. Family matters to discuss before the will reading. Now, sitting in his modest living room surrounded by scientific journals and travel mementos, I struggled to find the words to upend his world alongside mine. "You seem troubled, Emily Foster," he observed, setting 2 cups of tea on the coffee table. At 58, James Foster remained handsome with the same dark eyes I saw in my mirror every morning. "Is Douglas making things difficult about Eleanor's estate?" "It's more complicated than that," I began, then faltered. "How did one ask a man if he might be your biological father?" "Uncle James, did you and my mother were you ever together before she married Father?" The cup froze halfway to his lips, his expression shifting from surprise to guarded caution. "Why would you ask about ancient history now?" "Because Douglas has informed me that he's not my biological father, and he's using that claim to challenge my place in grandmother's will." James set his cup down with deliberate care. That sounds like Douglas, calculating even in cruelty. He studied my face with new intensity. "What has your mother told you?" I recounted my mother's revelations about their past relationship, watching his expression cycle through nostalgia, pain, and something that looked remarkably like hope. "I never knew," he said finally. "Catherine never told me she was pregnant. By the time I heard about the marriage, it was already done." He leaned forward. "Emily Foster, are you saying you believe I might be your father? The timing fits according to Mother, but Douglas is determined to prove I have no Foster blood to claim my inheritance." James's expression darkened. "Eleanor's will specifically mentions you by name. Douglas can't simply write you out of it. He claims he can challenge any provisions made under false pretenses, namely that grandmother believed me to be his biological daughter." James rose abruptly, pacing the small room. "This is absurd. Even if you are not Douglas's biological child, you're still Eleanor's granddaughter if you're my daughter." He stopped, meeting my gaze directly. "We need to know for certain. A DNA test would settle this question definitively." The clinical simplicity of his solution both relieved and terrified me. "You'd be willing to take one?" Without hesitation, he replied, "I've always felt a connection to you that I couldn't quite explain." "If you are my daughter," his voice caught, "well, let's confirm the facts before we get ahead of ourselves." We arranged for expedited testing that same day using a private lab that promised results within 72 hours, just enough time before the will reading. As we submitted our samples, a strange combination of dread and anticipation settled in my stomach. Regardless of the outcome, my relationship with both men would be irrevocably altered. While awaiting results, I attempted to gather information about grandmother's will. I contacted her personal attorney, Bernard Walsh, separate from the family trust advisor, Harrison Mills. "I'm afraid I can't discuss the specific provisions before the official reading," Bernard explained when I visited his office, "but I can assure you that your grandmother was of sound mind and very clear about her intentions." "Did she know?" I asked directly about my biological parentage. Bernard's carefully neutral expression slipped momentarily. Emily Foster sat rigid in her darkened room, her phone forgotten in trembling hands. The sounds of the bustling hospital faded into a distant memory. Every shadow around her seemed to stretch and press in, suffocating her with uncertainty. Outside, the rain drummed against the window, mingling with the scent of wet leaves. Who else knew the truth? What were they planning to do next? Just as she reached for her grandmother's letter, the phone rang again. This time, an unknown number. Was this her salvation, or was Douglas already one step ahead? As the moments ticked by, Emily Foster felt a storm brewing inside her. She was caught in a whirlwind tangled with family secrets, betrayal, and fierce determination. The weight of her grandmother's words hung heavy on her heart. Rose Collins had been both a guiding light and a keeper of secrets. Now, Emily Foster was left to untangle the threads of a family legacy where old money clashed with new values, where her identity was shrouded in doubt. What would her family think if they knew the truth? She felt the sharp pangs of emotion flood over her as she tore through the carefully folded pages of the letter. Every word whispered of her duty to honor her grandmother's wishes while securing her place within a family committed to shadows and lies. Suddenly, her mother's frantic voice echoed in her mind. "Emily, Foster, be careful. Douglas knows you've met with James. He's furious." The urgency of the matter twisted her stomach into knots. With the will reading looming, she needed answers. Amid the chaos, the DNA results finally arrived 2 days before the reading. Heart racing, Emily Foster opened the encrypted email with trembling fingers. As her eyes scanned the document, she froze. Probability of paternity, 99.99998%. James Foster was undeniably her biological father. The room blurred as a rush of emotions washed over her. Vindication, grief over a relationship lost, and rage at the years of deception. In an instant, the truth shattered everything she thought she knew. She picked up her phone, dialing James. "You have Catherine's smile," he said with quiet emotion. "But those eyes, they're Foster eyes, my mother's eyes." The weight of betrayal lifted just enough for hope to creep in. But as she prepared for the storm ahead, Emily Foster knew she'd need every ounce of resilience she could muster, because in the world of family legacies, things were about to get much darker. We agreed to meet before the will reading to discuss our approach. Armed with DNA proof, I finally had leverage against Douglas, or so I thought. That evening, Harrison Mills requested an urgent meeting at his office. Despite my misgivings, I agreed, curious about this sudden outreach from my father's No Douglas's legal ally. The elegant offices of Mills and Associates signaled old money and discretion. Harrison, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, greeted me with practiced cordiality that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily Foster, thank you for coming. I thought we should discuss certain developments before the will reading. You mean the fact that Douglas isn't my biological father, or that you filed a frivolous petition to delay the reading?" His smile tightened. "Actually, I was referring to the DNA test you and James arranged." My blood ran cold. How could he possibly know about the test? We had been meticulously careful. "Douglas was quite distressed to learn of this independent investigation," Harrison continued. "He asked me to convey a proposal." He slid a document across his desk. It was a waiver agreement relinquishing all claims to Eleanor Foster's estate in exchange for a one-time payment of $250,000. "This is absurd," I said, pushing it back. Grandmother specifically included me in her will. Yes, under the presumption you were Douglas's daughter. Now that we know otherwise, now we know I'm James's daughter, which makes me even more legitimately Eleanor's granddaughter than if I were Douglas's, I interrupted. Blood relatives deserve the family fortune. Isn't that what Douglas always says? Harrison's expression shifted. There are complexities you're unaware of, Emily Foster. Legal nuances regarding the Foster Trust that supersede simple biology. What complexities? I'm not at liberty to discuss details before the reading, but I strongly advise you to consider this offer. Douglas is prepared to be quite aggressive in defending the family interests. The veiled threat hung between us. I left without signing, more determined than ever to stand my ground, but deeply unsettled by Harrison's confidence despite our seemingly ironclad DNA evidence. The next morning brought the revelation that shattered my understanding of the entire situation. James called, his voice tight with controlled fury. Emily Foster, I've just received some disturbing information from an old family friend, a nurse who worked with my father decades ago. He paused. Douglas isn't biologically a Foster. What? The room seemed to tilt around me. Apparently, my parents adopted Douglas as an infant after my mother had several miscarriages. When she unexpectedly became pregnant with me years later, they decided to keep the adoption quiet, not wanting Douglas to feel like less than their son. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Douglas wasn't a blood Foster, then by his own logic. Does Douglas know? I managed. I don't think so. Our parents took the secret to their graves, but Eleanor might have known. She and my mother were extremely close. That's why Harrison was so confident. I breathed. There must be something in the will or trust document specifying blood relations. Exactly. I've been reviewing copies of the original Foster Trust. There's a specific clause requiring direct bloodline descent for principal inheritance. Douglas would have been protected by his legal adoption. But by making this about biological legitimacy, he's potentially disqualified himself. The irony was almost too perfect. Douglas's attempt to disinherit me by questioning my biological connection to the Foster line could backfire catastrophically if his own adoption came to light. What do we do with this information? I asked. James was quiet for a moment. That depends on what you want, Emily Foster. What Douglas deserves and what's right for our family might be different things. I considered his words carefully. A hush fell over the room like an unexpected storm, tension crackling in the air. Harrison's words, sharp and pointed, tightened the atmosphere, frost swirling behind the heavy velvet drapes. All eyes shifted, first to me, then to James, whose clenched jaw revealed a depth of worry beyond words. The scent of old leather and dust hung like a foreboding presence as Harrison slid forward a faded envelope. This document, he declared, suggests our understanding of the Foster heritage may have been misguided. As silence engulfed us, the room seemed to hold its breath, the certainty that had once gripped Douglas faltering. It was now my voice, and James's, that mattered most. The morning of the will reading had dawned crisp and bold. Philadelphia's autumn painted the trees outside Grandmother Rose Collins' mansion in dazzling colors, a picturesque facade masking the storm brewing within. James and I arrived early, our shared secret a delicate piece in this family chess game. Harrison Mills presided with authority at the dining table, leather portfolio open before him, while the various Fosters settled into their high-backed chairs. Douglas, sitting across from me, exuded a confidence that only angered me further, flanked by my brothers, visibly uncomfortable but ready to support their father. "Before we begin," Harrison announced, his gaze sweeping the room, "I must address a delicate matter regarding succession eligibility." Douglas straightened, shooting me a triumphant glance igniting the tension. "It has come to our attention that certain beneficiaries named in Grandmother's will may not qualify under the bloodline provisions of the original Foster Family Trust," Harrison continued. The words hung heavy as my mother gripped my hand tightly beneath the table. Harrison pressed on. As you know, Rose's estate is divided between her independently controlled assets and those governed by the family trust her father established. The trust explicitly requires beneficiaries to be blood descendants of the Foster line. Which is why we need to address Emily's situation, Douglas interrupted smoothly, his voice a polished dagger. Recent information suggests she is not my biological daughter, and therefore has no claim to the Foster inheritance. Gasps surged through the room, the air thick with unspoken accusation. James and I exchanged glances, our plan suddenly derailed by Douglas's preemptive strike. His bold move sent shocking ripples around the table. I have DNA evidence, Douglas pressed on, sliding a folder toward Harrison, confirming Emily is not my biological child. Under the bloodline requirement, she is ineligible for trust distribution. And just like that, the foundations of family loyalty and love trembled under the weight of betrayal. I inhaled sharply, trying to steady my racing heart. What this meant for my place within the Foster legacy was an uncharted territory, a quest for recognition surrounded by the shadows of secrets that lingered like ghosts from the past. As I looked around the table, I wondered, could truth really cut through the bonds of blood? Would uncovering the hidden stories bring us closer or tear us apart forever? My heart pounded as Harrison reviewed the documents. We had anticipated raising the paternity issue ourselves, but Douglas had outmaneuvered us by presenting his own testing. Testing I had never consented to or provided samples for. "May I ask how you obtained my DNA for this test?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice level. Douglas's smile was cold. "From your water glass at our last family dinner. Quite simple, really." "That's illegal," James interjected. "Unauthorized DNA testing." "Irrelevant to the inheritance question," Harrison cut in. "The science is sound regardless of collection methods." I felt our carefully constructed plan crumbling. If Harrison accepted Douglas's evidence while dismissing the legality of collection, we would lose our chance to reveal the truth on our terms. "I have additional evidence pertinent to the bloodline question," I said firmly, removing our own testing results from my bag. "DNA confirmation that James Foster is my biological father." The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Douglas's face contorted with fury as he turned on my mother, who met his gaze unflinchingly. "This changes nothing," Harrison insisted after reviewing our documentation. "The trust specifies foster blood from Eleanor's direct line, which flows through her son, Douglas, to his legitimate heirs. It was the opening we needed." James stood slowly, commanding the room's attention. "I believe we need to examine the precise language of the trust," he said. "My understanding is that it requires beneficiaries to be blood descendants of Harold Foster, Eleanor's father. If that's the case, we have a significant problem." Harrison frowned. "What problem?" "Douglas is not biologically a Foster," James stated clearly. "He was adopted as an infant, a fact our parents kept private to protect him, but which Eleanor was aware of." The silence that followed was deafening. Douglas's face drained of color as he stared at his brother in naked shock. "That's absurd," he finally sputtered. Emily Foster sat in her grandmother Rose Collins' sunlit kitchen, the warm scent of lemon cookies swirling around her. The sounds of porcelain gently rattling against the table echoed in her mind, blending with the distant memory of her grandmother's kind, yet burdened eyes. There, amid the comforting chaos of baked treats and family secrets, Emily Foster felt an unexpected wave of nostalgia wash over her. A whispered promise floated through the air. "You're special, Jenny. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Fragments of the past danced like sunlight on the walls, bright yet heavy. Now, as she faced the storm of familial conflict, those words tugged at her heart, asking the question that would forever change her life: How far would she go to secure her place in the family and honor her grandmother's wishes? In the midst of betrayal and shattered trust, the confrontation reached its boiling point. James, her estranged cousin, sat across from Emily Foster, unyielding. "That's absurd," he sputtered, a mix of denial and anger flooding his voice. "A desperate lie," Douglas chimed in, refusing to back down. The air crackled with tension as Douglas revealed a folder filled with damning documents. "If bloodline matters here, then I am Eleanor's only child, and Emily Foster is James's only biological daughter." Harrison looked stricken, his loyalty pitted against professional duty. Would family ties be severed over greed? Then Bernard Walsh, her grandmother's unwavering attorney, entered. Leaning on his cane, he broke the silence. "I'm here for this reading." Sitting at the table with the evidence spread before him, he seemed a bastion of calm amid chaos. As Bernard reviewed grandmother's will, an unsettling quiet enveloped the room. What secrets had lingered for so long? What revelations awaited? In a moment heavy with foreboding, Bernard finally began to read. "If you're hearing this, the secret I've kept for decades is now exposed." The air became thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Douglas was adopted, a noble act of love after years of heartache. Yet I've always known, Emily Foster is James's biological daughter. A grandmother knows her own blood. The words hung in the air, heavy like a gathering storm. Bernard continued, "The Foster Trust requires blood relations for inheritance. I have restructured my estate, ensuring my wishes don't align with outdated notions of bloodline purity." Each word struck like thunder, and Douglas's face paled. His dreams of fortune seemed to crumble. Bernard's steady voice pierced the enveloping darkness. "In light of the DNA evidence, the distribution is as follows." Emily Foster's heart raced. Would justice finally prevail? When the chaos erupted, Douglas lunged at the documents with frantic desperation. "You promised!" he shouted at Emily Foster, frustration breaking through his facade. Yet she remained steady. "No, you said that. I only asked if you'd keep your word." The room buzzed with tension and realization. Would love triumph over greed? Would Emily Foster finally claim her rightful place? Not just in the family, but in honoring the legacy of a woman who believed in her? In the end, it was not just about inheritance or bloodlines, but the indomitable spirit of family. Emily Foster emerged from the shadows of lies, ready to stand tall, proving that sometimes a heart full of hope is worth more than any fortune. The moment felt electric, the room thick with tension. Emily Foster stood there, heart racing as Douglas's carefully curated facade began to crumble. The truth was finally out, and it weighed heavily on everyone present. As Douglas stormed out of the mansion, threats of legal battles trailing behind him, it was clear that his empire of lies was in shambles. "Do you believe him?" asked Harrison Mills, his voice cracked and frantic. Once a trusted family advisor, he now wore the shame of deceit like a shattered armor. Emily's brothers were left in stunned silence, grappling with the revelations that twisted their family ties. "Did you know?" Thomas, the more empathetic brother, finally broke the silence. "All those years, the way he treated you, it all makes sense now." His words cut through the tension, striking a chord deep within Emily. William, usually stoic, nodded gravely. "For what it's worth, you've always been our sister. That hasn't changed." Their sincerity washed over Emily, a soothing balm against the heartbreak. Could she find a way to rebuild the fractured bonds? As their mother approached, Emily noticed a mix of relief and guilt clouding her features. "I should have told you long ago," she started, voice shaking. Emily understood now, instinctively finishing her mother's thought. "You were protecting me." That evening, in Grandmother Rose Collins' library, a place filled with whispers of family history, James turned to her. "What will you do now?" The weight of missed years pressed heavily on his voice. "Build something new," Emily replied, her spirit ignited by newfound resolve. "We can't reclaim what's lost, but we can forge a better path ahead." As they spoke, shadows danced across the walnut bookshelves, and for the first time, Emily recognized the resemblance in their expressions. They were bound by more than blood. They shared a vision, a hope for a future that honored their grandmother's legacy while breaking free from the chains of the past. The air felt lighter. A subtle promise of healing whispered in the rustle of leaves outside, mingling with the scent of rain on old wood. In that quiet moment, Emily discovered the true value of family wasn't just about inheritance or bloodlines. It was about standing together, ready to rise from the ashes of deceit, stronger and more united than before. Would love overcome the shadows of greed? Only time would tell. As we talked into the night, sharing stories and discovering connections, I felt grandmother's presence in the room, her wisdom, her foresight, her absolute certainty that truth would eventually prevail. She had arranged everything perfectly, ensuring that justice would be served without requiring me to deliver it personally. In the end, Douglas's downfall came not from my actions, but from his own character revealed under pressure. He had spent decades ensuring I felt like an outsider in the family, never suspecting that he was the true outsider all along. The irony was perfect and perfectly sufficient. As I looked toward the future, a future that included a father who actually wanted me in his life, I realized that was the greatest inheritance of all.